and only comments for today, obviously a really busy week and I think somewhat of a distracting day for a lot of us too. So everybody's patience is definitely definitely required and appreciated. And like I was sort of saying before we got the meeting started, you know, we do have a lot to do leading up to the end of this month. And so we've sort of realigned today's meeting based on some of the things we talked about last Thursday in the work groups, particularly fiscal policy wanting to sort of have another time to sort of, you know, see how the principles we banged out last week, and I thought was a very good meeting, very interactive, very collaborative. We explored a lot of areas and wording and stuff like that, but take a look at what the cleaned up language looks like, and I think this is based on Rick's very good suggestion to let's have another chance to look at these things before we take them to the full commission. So we'll be looking to do that in fiscal policy. But before we get into that, the adequacy work group really needed some additional time to get through some of their categorical briefs and then talk about principles. So I really think the bulk of this afternoon's meeting is really going to be dedicated to adequacy. And with the adequacy work group, you know, the way work groups have worked is there's certain members of each of them, but we certainly welcome all of our voices on it. We just tried to sort of divide up the work to make it more easier to, I guess, find time for everybody to participate in a meaningful way. But certainly welcome everybody's voice, whether you're on or not on the various work groups. So and then the last part of our meeting really is more along the lines of a full commission meeting, talking about some of the principles and the principal findings that have come out of the engagement work group, what sort of things we can accept on there, what sort of things we still feel are sort of prickly issues that need some more definition to them. Maybe they need some more deliberation to them. We do have a long meeting coming up. Is it next week, Bruce? No, Bruce, you're muted.
Yeah, got it, thanks. Next Monday, right now, we're scheduled for work group meetings, a work group Monday. The Thursday, November 12th, we're scheduled for a full commission meeting, and I can't remember if that's extended or not.
I know there's an extended one coming up soon.
Well, we've added an additional meeting for Thursday, November 12th that should be on folks' calendars. Yeah.
And we can also extend those, you know, based on how much time we need to accomplish the work. I don't see extending things well into the evening. I don't want to necessarily do that, but maybe going, you know, 2 to 4 is normal. 2 to 5 certainly a doable thing. The legislative postings just show start times, and so I think we can work with that, but we'll try to keep everybody informed on what the plans are, because obviously, you know, as we develop things, we're going to have to call audibles now and then, and definitely respond to you know, the current situation that we're facing. So anyway, with that, I do want to have a quick review and approval of the minutes from our October 26th meeting. They were sent around, it's on the website. Has everyone had a chance to give them a look-see? And if so, I'd take a motion for the commission to approve the minutes from October 26th, 2020.
So moved.
Moved
Second.
by Myler, seconded by Tremblay. So further discussion, amplification, clarification, deletion. Jordan, thanks very much for putting these together. Seeing no further discussion, we'll take a quick roll call of the members. Luno, yes. Myler,
Yes.
Ames,
Yes.
Ladd,
Yes.
Khan.
Yes.
Let's see, John Morgan on, Ardinger,
Yes.
Bergeron,
Yes.
Cascadden,
Yes.
Dave Ryan on, let's see, Dave, Beardmore,
Yep.
Estabrook,
Yes.
Tremblay,
Yes.
Dwyer,
Yes.
Heward,
Yes.
Zanchuk,
Yes.
Heath.
Yes.
Terrific. The minutes carry, and I'm at this point, I'm going to just sort of hand it over to Jay to really lead us through what's really an adequacy work group agenda. And Jay, if you don't mind taking the reins.
Sure. And ably, Bruce is nearby, so we will rely on his consolidated memo, which he sent around 12:20 today. And hopefully folks have at least got it for a guide for this conversation. So hopefully this doesn't take quite as long as we've allocated. Wouldn't that be a novel thing? And last week, I mean, what we're trying to do is go through consideration of what is the education cost model and how does it match up to an adequacy standard. And we have talked about accepting the model, the education cost model. We've done that. We've accepted that we would include transportation costs in that model. And we have accepted within the work group and up for consideration by the commission what student needs and district characteristics would be accepted as part of the education cost model and have weights that would then extend to an estimation model for the future. We considered as a work group, so what you've got in the first recommendation in the second paragraph, we considered all those variables and accepted, are prepared to recommend the commission accept them. And the weights that have been assigned. So it is the weight question that is on the table for us. And we considered district size a couple of times and in different ways. While there may be some efficiencies that one might envision or consolidations, we acknowledged that that was beyond our charge as a commission, that if the legislature wished to take that under consideration, there are means to consider like distance and density, distance to other districts, density, population. But we have not considered those factors, nor do we have those indicators available to us. And so we are accepting all of the student need and district characteristic variables. the weights that have been recommended for them, and making this additional note. And Bruce, the only word that I thought was missing from the second paragraph there is the word consolidation, because it is the issue that if the legislature wished to take it up, it could, and develop a charge around district size and factors that ought to go into the conversation for consolidation. But we're not recommending that. Just saying to the commission, from the commission, that the legislature, should it wish to do so, should take that up at a future date.
Jay, just quickly, the last sentence of that second paragraph references that the future legislature might
Okay,
address this in terms of incentives to consolidate or cost share in some other ways, or disincentives if they want to penalize districts that choose to remain small.
Yeah.
Do you want something more explicit about consolidation in there, or will that suffice?
yeah, it was in a couple sentences up. We have no basis for making consolidation recommendations.
Okay, good.
Can I add to something about that?
Please do, Iris. You've been, and I gotta, yeah, Iris, you've just been very useful in bringing forward this conversation throughout, and you would, I'm very
Thank you, Jim.
hearing what you have.
But I mean, I understand it's the last sentence that I'm concerned about, and I have some language I'd like to propose. But the two sentences that come before that, I think, speak enough to the fact that we don't want to get into the issue of consolidation. I don't think that was the issue. The issue was that Drew outlined a way through by measuring population density or distance, by performing that kind of analysis, you could remove districts that were, quote, small by choice from receiving the extra weight funding for small districts, and thereby remove some of the anomalies that show up in the spreadsheet. So I think that last sentence, to more accurately reflect what Drew had offered us and what I thought we were interested in, that it might say something like future legislative action might consider removing the extra size weight funding from districts which choose to remain small as measured by a population density or distance analysis. I thought that was the issue. That we didn't really want to get into calling for a study of whether to ask schools to consolidate. We just didn't want to reward schools for being small when they chose to do that, mostly because they had the wealth to do it.
Looks like Chris has a thought on this.
I like separating the issues in the way that you did, Iris. I like having the small by choice standalone, but I do think we have to acknowledge in some way that, and you raise it above the cost inefficiencies, that if we are going to control costs in the future, we need to acknowledge in some way that we're paying a really high price for the inefficiencies of very small districts, and the legislature might consider that. But I think it's right to separate those two because they're really different issues.
Bruce, can
Yeah, actually, if I could,
wording?
I took a note there with Iris's comment. Iris, let me make sure I got it pretty close to correct anyway. So for that last sentence, future legislative action might consider removing the extra size weight for districts that choose to remain small or stay small. Does that catch it?
As measured by a population density distance analysis.
Thank you.
Those are two distinct analyses, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, one or the other or both, as outlined in the air brief that spoke to this issue.
I got that, thanks.
Thank you.
I'm glad you added that, Iris, because I think that was an important piece that we discussed at our last meeting with Drew. So excellent. That's good to have that in there. Thank you.
And I'll strike the rest of that sentence. Recommendations that might address size-related deficiency goes, this new language substitutes.
Can you just, you want to flash that? Do you want to share your screen for a moment?
I took all that in longhand.
Okay. I'm so used to you guys doing this on the fly. Thanks. Corinne.
Just want to clarify, because I was using the guidance questions that Bruce had put out a while ago. So if we're talking about district size, we are not talking about grade levels, correct?
That's correct.
That's off the table. Okay, great.
Well, it's still on the table. It's not.
Oh, it's still on the table?
Well, grade levels as
Well, I
a,
don't think it should be, so there.
You mean the weight for
An added weight for grade level. Right.
it's still part of the model.
It's still part of the model
It is.
as a weight?
It is
Okay,
for middle school primarily, a little bit for high school.
Jay.
Yeah.
Do we have any data that shows any correlation between district size and outcomes?
Sure.
Well, anything's going to be swamped by the Manchester.
yeah, right. Yeah.
It's not going to be for New Hampshire.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, it's a part of the outcome weight.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the scatter plot, you could probably identify the small districts across the whole spectrum, either, above or below performance levels, because I don't think there was any close correlation. There was a lot of scatter.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I know we've got the data. I just don't know if we did a correlation analysis on that. And the only reason I bring it up is because, if we're starting to muck around with configuration, and I'm not saying good or bad, that how configuration factors into outcomes, might not be known, and we're obviously using outcomes as a lead measure of how cost reapportionment takes place through the estimated cost model.
Yeah, I just found exhibit 15, I think maybe does it. Sorry.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jay.
Okay, other members of the commission, because I and help Bruce and David. The reason we're doing this kind of consideration at a commission-wide meeting is to hear if there are other commissioners that question the incorporation of the weights as they're recommended in version 8 of the AIR study. Dick?
Yeah, yes, I do agree with the work group on that. And I have a question though. This is about accepting the ECM. And I think that acceptance is with all the weighting that's part of it. I think it's a fabulous product that we've got in our hands. But my question to you is, what does it mean to say accepts the report in terms of our responsibility to address adequacy?
Well, I think just the way that I viewed what our task is to recommend a distribution model. And we're recommending a distribution model based on these characteristics, which are 5. And that's what we're doing.
But just maybe this might help. At an earlier point, the commission voted to receive the AAR report. In other words, at that stage, we felt that they had, AAR had met its contractual obligations to provide us with the analysis that we requested. So we, quote, received, unquote, the report. This document, and this is a draft, and this will all get, this is not a final report yet, but this opens with a statement that, or at least our work group, the work adequacy work group, accepts the cost model. It doesn't say it accepts the report. It says it accepts the cost model. So in other words, my interpretation of that language is that we will use that cost model to go forward with subsequent policy recommendations, including a distribution framework, and then a revenue model to support that distribution framework.
That's fine.
Very good question, Dick.
How about is the response good enough for you to, all right. If the question, good question, response good enough to continue to move forward.
I mean, Jay, if you're asking, let me just say, I heard the response being, we are not commenting on adequacy with this recommendation review at this point.
I need to hear that rephrased.
And I'm sorry, what I thought I heard you say is that we're talking about the education cost model, which is a method of determining predicted costs, total costs, to achieve a targeted defined outcome result. That model requires you to set your total cost target, and that model requires you to set your outcome target. The education cost model has those variables in it. And then in terms of the core question that I thought, and I may have blown it, that Dick was asking about, is that in terms of a question about what is the value or cost of adequacy for purposes of New Hampshire constitutional discussions, which, as we've heard, is unique apparently anywhere in the country. We're not commenting on that question with our receipt of the recommendation of this to support the education cost model and the way it establishes relationships among communities in terms of need.
I don't see it. I don't know, because the last sentence talks about the dollars needed for students to have comparable opportunities to achieve average statewide performance outcomes. I read that as a statement of adequacy.
And I think that's correct. Within the adequacy work group, that's been the equation, the equivalency that we've been working from, is that adequacy in New Hampshire, we believe, consistent with court interpretations and constitutional language, that here adequacy means the opportunity for any student to achieve those average statewide outcomes. Now, we're not saying, we're not removing or suggesting that the current 193 language that talks about what goes into a student's educational experience that stands. There's no effort that I understand for us to change 193 so that all of those components of the student's education required by law continue. Those are curriculum components, they're skill components, they're knowledge components. I know that Rick has offered some language to tweak some of that, and that's to be considered at a different time, not right this minute, but it comes up in other places. But in any case, yes, our definition of adequacy is now an outcomes-based definition.
And
Another,
I think
that too is something that we agreed, or at least put forward previously. Sorry, missing who
Dave,
first.
Yeah, Jay, thanks. And Bill, I think your comments were right on. There was a lot to unpack in there, in your comments. And I would start with something I think I've probably mentioned it before, that we need to be really disciplined when it comes to the use of words like funds or costs. And I believe the ECM talks about a distribution of costs, not a distribution of funds, which could easily be interpreted to a distribution of state funds. It's a distribution of costs for public schools determined by what is needed for students to have comparable opportunities to achieve average statewide performance outcomes. And then I think the question that Bill had too, is that saying that that's a cost of inadequate education? I don't think that statement by itself is saying that it's a cost of inadequate education, but it's also not saying anything about how the state's involvement of funding schools. It's only about estimated costs.
David, you're suggesting in that last sentence of the first paragraph that the word funds be substituted with the word costs?
Yeah.
Got it.
And that we keep, yeah, because funds just has too much of a, you know, state funds to it. And let's keep these two things very separate.
Yeah, I think Dave put his finger on the issue that I was listening to and in the question and the response. So as long as we, I saw the ECM model as producing total predicted costs required to achieve without regard to source of funds. And so with Dave's change, I'm fine with that. I think it does the trick. And that's what I understood the adequacy work group to do.
Right, right. And just a little more on that, Bill. Step one in the ECM produced the actual estimated costs based on reapportionment for students to have equitable outcomes. Step two with the weights uses factors that very accurately predict those estimated costs.
Yes, and match up the results of step one.
Right, right.
Linear weights, absolutely. That's exactly the way I understand it.
And a huge takeaway from that actually comes from the evaluation that AIR did when they pulled school size out of it and showed ELL going negative. So no model that uses weights, and this is very unlike our current funding formula in New Hampshire. No model that we're using here is saying that an ELL student costs $12,000 or an ELL student costs minus $3,000. It's just, that's not how it's used. It's just used to build the aggregate estimated costs.
Yeah, for me, a huge takeaway from this step, this recommendation, is that the concept of focusing, measuring and focusing on the basis of relative need based on characteristics of districts and their students that really hasn't been as elevated a message as with this output model using the ECM. So I'm very happy with this. Thank you.
Well, I'm very happy with it too. If I don't want to jump in here. Jay, if it's okay. I'm very, very happy too with the outcomes, the product we've got here. What just happened? Oh. I'll leave it at that. I now see something on the screen that.
Well, I just tried to capture the changes that have been made to these two paragraphs. I went over from longhand to to keyboard. So I think this is simply what we've I believe.
Bruce, that's not right.
All right, help me. That's why I put it up.
My wording was not to go on that sentence. It was to go on the last sentence. It wasn't to go on the sentence that said, no, we have no basis. That sentence was to stand the way it was. It was to go on the last sentence, which started with future legislative action might. And there's everything be after address was supposed to come out, and the wording you tacked onto that other sentence was to go there, if you understand where.
Okay, I did this.
Yeah, exactly.
Future legislation might consider removing
Yeah.
size.
Right, exactly. And then delete the rest of the black words. No basis for making regular the matter. Yeah.
And
Yep.
John, you had wanted to address this.
Yeah, thanks, Senator Khan. I guess I was following around the conversation as it relates to the first paragraph here and the distinction between costs and funds, and wanting to be sensitive to that difference. I guess I question if we're going to talk about costs and not funds, should we also change the word distribution? I think about distributing funds, but perhaps identifying costs or calculating costs. If we're not spreading state aid here, maybe I'm splitting hairs, but I don't know. That was my thought.
Is it allocation, John?
Yeah, something like that. The allocation of costs or the identification of costs. Not a
I
fully formed
got to
thought.
look at our charge. How many screens can we have going at once? Yeah, okay, so duly noted, John. Is the word distribution a part of our charge? Frankly, I don't know that the word allocation is going to be that helpful. We usually allocate funds.
I guess that's why I started with identify.
We might assign costs as another verb.
Yeah, and no need to slow us down on this.
Yeah, no, it's a
We've got a lot to do.
good. It's a
We'll come back to it.
duly noted.
If
Who else? Did I see? Val, did you have your hand
Yeah,
up?
I just think on the second paragraph, the end of the paragraph, I think Iris commented that she wasn't sure it was population density or distance, one or the other. Perhaps an and or would be appropriate there, since we're not saying to use both of these analyses, but it may be one or the other. I think that's what you're aiming at.
Yeah.
Iris.
definitely, Val, thank you.
Yeah.
I also want to talk about paragraph 1.
Okay.
If the adequacy committee is going to interpret this statement the way you've been discussing, which is fine with me, I thought part of our charge was to discuss a distribution formula, because a distribution formula is both an expression of fiscal policy and education policy, and I thought was part of our province. So if we're not looking at the ECM as generating a distribution formula, which I'm sorry, but it does, because it produces a spreadsheet that identifies what should be. Okay, you're distributing that as the cost, but there, per pupil cost as opposed to per pupil funding. But anyway, what happens to a distribution formula funding formula if we're not going to discuss it here?
Question.
Iris, wouldn't this distribution equal the funding mechanism if only we were considering 100% of these costs being the responsibility of the state? Because if we say that it's not 100%, then the funding distribution may not be exactly proportional to this cost distribution.
That's correct.
Just, I've got the charge in front of me if you'd like.
So in other words, you're saying that we wait and see what kind of fiscal policy comes up with, and then we see how that interfaces with the costing.
Well, fiscal policy already came up with it last week. And
Okay,
we'll be
where?
talking about it a little bit, but
What is it?
I think the one sentence that we all centered on was the opportunity for an adequate education is based on student needs and community characteristics and can best be made equitable through differentiated state funding.
Through differentiated state funding.
Which still matches up to Val's clarification there.
That's the only statement that will be made on a distribution formula?
No, it's just the core principle.
Okay. All right, you're losing me. Let's see where everybody else goes.
Well, I'm sorry, I did not, Jordan, are you seeing any hands? I'm comfortable at this point to, with these two paragraphs. I think what we do have a distribution model. How this converts to a allocation of funds, that's I think that's the difference of a commission report to a legislative consideration. And I think, David, that was where your committee, the fiscal policy committee, landed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we had some wordier versions of it. I think after a couple hours of robust discussion, we sort of synthesized it down to that, but it certainly needs to be built out some more. But whether we're going to be modeling that or LBA is going to be modeling that, I think whatever we put down needs to serve as a basis for state funding models.
May I ask a question, Jay?
Good. And Rick's, I saw his hand.
Let Rick go. Sorry.
No, just wanting to make sure we recognize.
Okay, thank you very much, Jay. Got a question here. You know, we were discussing a few moments ago whether there was any share or responsibility at all for the costing here of this model or the performance outcome that a district chooses to work towards and attain. Some districts can provide, due to their unique qualities, and their expenses as they reflect on the DOE 25 form are going to be significantly higher. And I see that in terms of transportation. If you're extending this away from special ed costs, if you're extending this beyond to and from school, and now including all those enrichment type activities or athletic activities or other activities into this that I choose as a district to do, but the state's going to have to assume that? Or is the local district going to have to assume those change? This is where I've been very, very concerned and actually am not satisfied with this formula if we're going to base this total amount of money on what is coming in from districts right now on their DOE 25 forms. I think there's items on there which are responsibility of the school district and are not necessary to achieve an adequate education. They're enrichment beyond.
So Jay,
Yeah,
if there are enrichment beyond, doesn't that enrichment factor into the outcomes?
of course.
You mean a football program is going to basically impact those criteria that we have established, those academic standards which we have established? That's going to impact?
Well, it all beyond academics, it also factors into graduation rates and attendance, which are two other factors that are considered with that for outcomes.
I think that there's some work that needs to be done in this before I can accept it. The other thing that I had a question about was in the first paragraph of the adequacy statement there. On the last line, you use the word comparable opportunities. I don't think that some of these districts will ever be able to provide the same type of activity leading towards that opportunity for education. They may substitute it or with something else, or they may have another way of doing it. That's why we have given instruction and curriculum as a total local control issue. So we cannot compare Hudson or Salem to little community out in the woods somewhere.
Compare on what basis?
So I don't disagree with what you're saying, but I think to tear this sentence apart and not include opportunities to achieve average statewide performance outcomes.
You just then said, Jay, to have opportunities, not comparable opportunities, to have opportunities. I don't know why we have the word comparable in there.
Okay, all right. Well, that's a good clarification of
Equitable statewide outcome.
it is, yeah, the word equitable has been used often. I think as a commission, we need to get comfortable with the use of that word around opportunities. Isn't a necessary adjective. Chris?
I don't think it is a necessary adjective. I think Rick's point is to have the opportunity to achieve average statewide performance outcomes. So that, there are going to be so many different ways that different districts achieve that. I mean, some people believe that the small district has a unique advantage in doing that, obviously, right? Even if it doesn't have all the bells and whistles that another school might be. So I think it's just the opportunity to achieve an average statewide performance. So we're not trying to make those opportunities equitable other than related to performance.
Good.
Yeah, I second that. I think that's just right.
Who is that, Bill?
No, that was Dick.
Yeah. Whose hands are up?
Oh.
Bill,
Bill has got one, and Dave.
Dave?
Yeah. Rick brought it up a couple of times now, and I just want to, not every school district has a football program. Not every school district has, AP Psych. Not every, school has district has, AP Physics curriculum or AP World Languages, and not every school district has unified arts for wood. And I think a lot of these things we do leave up to local control. But I guess at the end of the day, if this is a cost issue, I would ask Rick, in his professional opinion, what does it cost to run a football program? Middle JV and
I can get off the issue of the football program. Let's stay with AP, okay? So, if you're going to have an AP course in one community or multiple AP courses, a small town's not going to be able to do that. They may be able to provide that resource through an online type program with some assistance, but they're not going to be comparable from the standpoint that they're done in the classroom with instruction in the classroom, and students working collaboratively. You may have a small school with only 1 or 2 kids in that AP course. It may be online with VLAX or some other opportunity. So I think the word comparable, it can get confusing. Equitable, fair, those type of things I understand better. I do not, this comparable, apples and oranges, they're both fruit, but are they comparable?
I David, if you're okay with that, I think Chris's clarification there was,
yeah.
If we take that word, delete the word comparable, I think we've been very, very consistent with our wording of opportunities for an adequate education, opportunities to achieve statewide average outcomes.
So the only thing, Jay, I think the reason we had comparable in there,
Comparable.
But
Big difference.
well, no, I thought it was comparable outcomes, but I don't think we had settled on statewide average being the adequacy target. Or is it a standard deviation below statewide average? I mean, or is it a standard deviation above statewide average? But whatever it is, in order for it to be equitable, it's got to be comparable outcomes for all the students statewide. And I think that's probably the source of the word comparable in there. But if the commission's going in a direction that's saying statewide average is that outcome, then obviously we know how to cost that very well.
That gets to, Jay, can I ask my question?
Yeah, please, Bill. Yeah.
So following Dave's point, as long as this language isn't saying anything about how much of the total cost is going to be funded by the locally governed property tax versus the state budget versus federal, I'm fine with this. It's just, I don't want my support for this language to be construed as if I'm saying that whatever costs we identify here have to be funded with just state budget dollars. I certainly don't agree with that.
Oh.
So you just let me off the hook, Jay. Why don't you say no?
Bad place to freeze.
No,
You froze once you let me off the hook.
Sorry, I'm back. Sorry.
Sorry, you're in the big city now, and it's and now you're muted. Okay, try again. Bill.
Hello there. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I just wanted to make clear that what we're talking about as these predicted cost levels are total cost levels, and it's not commenting or requiring an outcome in terms of the role of locally governed property taxes versus state budget dollars.
Right, and not apportioning those that to any source in particular, right? And
I would like to respond to David's point about the average outcomes. I
Yes.
disagree with him on that interpretation. I think it's very important that we say average statewide performance outcomes. I think once you deviate from that, it doesn't give much meaning to adequacy.
I agree with you. Yeah.
Well, no, it certainly does. I mean, we can calculate what one standard deviation above statewide average costs. That can be calculated.
I understand that, but I'm saying
Similarly, one standard deviation below can be calculated. And I think if the argument is about student equity, then it's about every student having the opportunity to achieve comparable outcomes, whatever that outcome happens to be.
what I'm saying is that I disagree. I don't think it's about having the opportunity to achieve comparable outcomes. I think it's about the opportunity to achieve state average outcomes. Because comparable could be nothing, it could be in the basement.
Yeah,
Well, we have average in the paragraph now.
Yeah, and I'm just saying, I think that's important.
Yep.
so without contributing to the substantive conversation, aware of my role, I do think the sense of the adequacy work group has been to set this target of the average statewide performance outcomes. That is the target that AIR used to then regress back to what the cost factors are to achieve that average student outcome. It is true that we can model plus or minus the standard deviation to see how that affects the cost and ultimately distribution. But it has been my understanding that the adequacy work group, it was at least implicitly, if not explicitly, setting this as the definition of an adequate education, the opportunity to achieve an average statewide performance outcome.
Well, I'd go further, Bruce. I think we were asked by AIR what the target ought to be, and we did indicate to them to set that target at the statewide average because of the way that it stood up to among the highest range, the highest distributions in the country. So, yeah.
Jay, could I jump in to games?
Yes.
I wonder, Dave, if that would help if this sentence said the distribution of costs for public schools is determined by a prediction of the dollars needed for all students. And within that concept of prediction, which is what the AIR model is, it's a prediction. There's, I think, room to address later on the question of standard deviation, for example.
I keep hearing that question come back, and I think it's steering us away from a consistent definition.
Yeah, Jay, I think I see what Dick's trying to suggest, and Jay, I agree with what Dick's saying. Jay, I agree with what you're saying too. If the adequacy work group is saying that the estimated cost model basically sets the cost for each district, for those students in that district, for all the students in that district, to have an opportunity for a state average outcome, and that's the outcome that the work group is recommending be the objective, then I think that's fine. I just want to make sure that we're testing that and not letting that. Just wanted to put it up front that we're having this discussion because that's basically the cost of state average outcomes. The state cost for that, all in, state and local, it's $3 billion, 2.975 whatever billion dollars, and and a higher outcome costs more. A lower outcome costs less.
But key,
Which-
Dave,
where-
key to this, I'm sorry to, right at that point, while we're saying that it's state average outcome, and that's 3.9 because 2.9, because that's the total cost. We are not saying anything about how that total cost is funded with
Right.
tax dollars.
Not
That
talking
is
about that. Yep.
left open. So
That's-
that's the number. And you know, a portion of that is going to be funded by, I'm sure, locally governed property tax, and a portion is going to be funded by state budget dollars, and a portion by federal, but that's still left open.
Right.
So yes, I think people have said to get a good total cost target, predicted cost target, base it on statewide average, set it, because New Hampshire does so well comparably to other states, to use the term, with in terms of its statewide performance.
Right. And something that I think you have to tie in with this discussion too, Bill, and I'm sorry, Jay, for running on this, is that when you do what is being done in that last sentence in the first paragraph, the distribution, the identification, the calculation, the allocation of costs for all students to receive those state average outcomes, that looks at the status quo where half the students are less than state average, half the students are more than state average. For the students that are under state average, it's pushing approximately $340 million into these districts. How do we know that? Compare what the districts are currently spending to the estimated cost model. And you can see that the districts that were achieving higher than state average are now having costs that are $340 million less. So that's been pushed to the below state average numbers. And you know, I think an assumption, it may be a very strong assumption, is that no district is going to want to achieve or is going to want to do less of a program than they're doing now. So this estimated cost model potentially increases total local state spending on public education by $340 million.
Potentially if fully implemented, and depending
Correct.
on whatever decision-making bodies there are both locally and at the state level about those allocations. But I mean, at least we're making a statement about what the outcome target is and what the factors ought to be to lead to a distribution.
Jay, I support all of that. I just want to make sure that we're having the discussion so you know.
Well, Dave, just to be clear, it doesn't mandate that for Bedford, it's predicting cost of 14,000 a pupil. It doesn't mandate spending the level that it's currently spending. Communities may decide to do that, but that's subject to, you know, their decision making.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I'm going to assume that these first two paragraphs, for the time being, Bruce, you can tighten this up a little bit, probably with a few words. I still have my word consolidation in there, but I'll give that to you later. But I think conversations led us to some important clarifications here. So that in the remaining time, so that we don't run over with this segment, what we did was assign to various members based on their interests the categorical aid programs that had been presented to the adequacy and distribution work group. And I think we've got, what we've got is not the briefs that were prepared by those assignees, but just the recommendations that came from each of those briefs. So we can tighten up on the briefs and the formats of the briefs so that they there's some comparability to what's covered in the briefs. But the recommendations are what Bruce was asked to pull together for us, and that's what we have before us currently. So, we can work through this, and the folks who, help prepare this, I think, can speak most directly to it. But we can start with career and technical education. Again, each of these segments are current categorical aid programs. So it's not recommending new categorical aid, nor is it recommending that any current categorical aid become part of the adequacy distribution formula.
And everybody, all the commission members now have all of the available briefs that back up that each of these sets of recommendations. So folks can, and those of course be posted on the website as well.
Right. There's one in here noted that we still need to work on.
Flush out recommendations, yeah.
So I don't know that we need to go through with presentations on each of these. I mean, they're here for us to take a look at. Rick has wisely said, let's let these soak in for a little bit. But
yeah, we can see if there's any sort of immediate clarifying questions, but probably not go through bullet by bullet.
Right.
Here.
Right. Thanks. All right. I see Corinne and Dick, and for Jordan, you're going to have to take it from there. I see Mary Heath. Okay.
Just an overall comment. I want to thank the committee for really breaking these down. After living through these areas for so long, not having them addressed has really increased the gap between the haves and the have-nots. And this is spot on. So I just want to thank you so much, because it does look at the whole child, and it does consider all the factors that kids need to have an adequate education. So thank you for that. I'm just very happy for all those battles I've fought in these areas and got nowhere. And let's move it forward so we can get somewhere. So thank you.
Thank you, Corinne. Dick?
Yeah, thanks. And I definitely thank you for that comment. I agree entirely. The CTE recommendation, consider a weighted value of 0.8. I just need to know as a technical matter how that would work.
Right.
Plug that number into the formula that AIR has given us.
Yeah.
I think my understanding is that messes things up. So how does this work? Jay,
Well, what we discussed is that it means around $4,000 a CTE student. And what members of the committee have cited is that there are additional costs that the hosting institutions can't address because they just don't receive significant enough tuition payments. So it is a recommendation of a level of funding. Again, it's calling attention to an issue. I think the weight is adding a definitive quantification to it that perhaps is different from the way that we're going about other elements of recommendations. So, but I'll let other members. I mean, it could be stated in a value statement as opposed to something that's in a weight. And
yeah, Jay, I didn't mean to argue against the proposal. I think as a technical matter, it runs into difficulties given that when you add a weight to the formula that we have to work with, it has an impact on everything else.
right. So I think
Yeah.
it was a means, and it wasn't intended as going into the formula, just as a way of quantifying a basis for broadening the participation rates in CTE programs.
I don't know. I had the same question as David just asked. Dick just asked. I don't understand. And we were told that if we, manipulated any of the other weights, that the whole thing fell apart. So I don't understand if we add in a new weight, which I support. By the way, I thought Val and his team, Rick and Susan, you did a great job in making the case for this to be included in adequacy, not as a categorical aid program. I thought your impassioned explanation was terrific, and you sure won me over. But I just, as Dick was saying, I don't understand technically how that works, and I don't understand Jay's response.
Yeah, I guess you're right. And I have interpreted this as still being categorical, but quantified in a manner that is comparable to the funding formula. I don't know how this goes into the funding formula. I mean,
I see. You were thinking the 0.8 was just when it was helping to pick a number. I see. For
Yeah.
the categorical aid.
Yeah. I mean, if you look at the actual,
See.
go ahead, Iris. Now, if you look at the actual costs, it's about $40 million a year. That's in the, is in the $3 billion number. It's being spent right now. But the way it's done is that the districts that host the CTE center
I know.
get no support. So, I mean, if we're going to leave it in categorical aid, then you need to add $40 million to categorical aid to fund CTE at a rate comparable to what would be required to, equitably, make a CTE available, because otherwise we get into the situation we have now where you have districts that don't send kids to CTE because of the cost, and
Yeah, I
it's all
understand what the
twins.
issues are.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, that would be fine.
I
that
understand
would be
what the
fine.
issues are, but I just, when you say weighted costing meant into the adequacy formula,
yeah.
it makes it sound like you're putting another weight in.
Well, yeah, no, we're just trying to show that, within the money that's already being spent, the host districts are carrying the full burden of a CTE student at their home CTE center, and that the CTE students have a cost about $4,000 above the normal cost, because CTE is expensive to provide. And if there was some way of supporting that through the state, it would help make CTE, something that's more available and perhaps more equitably supported. If it's done through categorical aid, that's fine, except that categorical aid is so subject to the whim of the legislature that,
Yeah.
a $40 million allocation all of a sudden gets cut down to $4 million. If you put it in the adequacy formula, it sort of protects it from that sort of manipulation because it becomes part of it. 0.8 may not be the right way of doing it, but we were trying to say it needs to be included in the basic cost of adequacy, not some extra thing outside of it that can get chopped down first pass in a budget discussion. So,
Well, then I'm still unclear whether it's categorical and not under this wording. I guess I was reacting to what I thought you were arguing in the work group, that it should not be categorical,
right.
which I could support. And
Right.
then
Well, yeah, we're not saying it should be. We're saying it should be part of adequacy, and
in some way.
Right.
Okay. Thanks.
but
Yeah, I was thinking that this thing is not categorical at all. I was trying to get this stuff moved into the adequacy formula, whereas this 25-75% split that we have right now, the districts never get the 75%. All the superintendents know they get closer to 50% if they get that. So the only way, Val is absolutely correct. The only way we're going to get this program to grow, and it needs to grow, the only way we're going to get the kids on these career pathways is to fund this program. This is a vital program. And as Val has said in the past, let's think outside the box a little bit here. Let's start thinking, where are the jobs? And are we really, in our present model, doing justice to 65-25?
Yeah, no, I think you're raising an important point about the capacity of our CTE programs. And part of that is funding related, that if we don't put more dollars to it, the capacity won't change. Right? I mean, that's basic principle. And I guess I'm trying to, I'd love to, rather than spend another 15 minutes with just that recommendation, maybe pull this back so that we can get to a value statement about this.
Yeah, I mean, CTE becomes one of a long list of more or less unfunded mandates. It's not being supported, even though it's being measured in the adequacy, the proof of adequacy. I forget which RSA it was. But
yeah, delivery of an adequate education.
Yeah, I mean, there are 3 line items there that have to do with this, and yet the state's not supporting it. So it's like, well, it's just another unfunded mandate. And if we're going to have all the mandates included in as part of the cost, which they are, this should be one of the most critical ones, because it's so directly related to the success of the educational process in providing a skilled workforce to the state.
Right, and it relates to outcomes.
Yep.
Students find a passion and a goal. It relates to, but it's not just 3 categories of study. In fact, I don't need to tell you, students are taking math and writing and science that relate to career orientation and CTE courses. So it's embedded in the curriculum. It's just host institutions have the ability to absorb their students and limited ability to continue to absorb at the same rate students from other schools, which puts the other schools at disadvantages, right? Because there's transportation needs as well as capacity issues.
So Jay, if I could follow up with a question, because
Sure.
I think there's really, I haven't heard any disagreement about the core argument for CTE,
Yep.
and I'd love to see it as a part of adequacy.
It is.
Which it is, but it's not costed. That's why this recommendation is before us. And so the question, I really come back to my original question, how do we do that? We've, as Iris pointed out, we've gone through an exercise with small school districts and bumped into a dead end trying to adjust the weights. Is this something, it's a good discussion to have because this issue will come up again.
Yeah.
Here's a need that, suppose we all agree, needs to be factored into the formula. How do we do that?
Right. I don't have a good answer. It's just I get apprehensive of adding additional factors and weights associated with those factors into the formula because it suggests that things can be put in and taken out and that we can accurately predict what the cost is. And I think that's changing too much of the body of the work.
Yeah.
Jay, I think that's a good point. Just like on the technical side of that, like all of the weights that are currently in the model are empirically derived by AIR from what the costs of running a school district are. If you add new weights on, those just may or may not reflect the true costs because, you know, you're using your best estimate, but it's not part of the model.
And I might add that this problem that you've identified may come up in subsequent categorical aid programs below as we go through this. So let's keep this is a big question. The value of a particular service delivery, a particular program is acknowledged, but it's right now it sits outside of the ECM. That doesn't, yeah, so my suggestion is that we put a stake in this right now, pin this as an issue that needs further consideration. And it could be that Drew might be helpful to us to think about this. I can't imagine that this is the first time a state has run into this specific issue of arriving at a funding formula and then realizing that there are programs that need to exist outside that funding formula, but still need to be universally available to kids in schools. And so let's see how this might crop up in some.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see how Delaware does it, because Delaware is the state that Eric Frauworth always brings up as the comparison to New Hampshire with, similarly sized school district with, tens of thousands more kids involved with CTE, and they're spending $90 million a year and we're spending $9 million. So how do they fund that huge outlay for CTE? Do they do it within their adequacy formula, or do they have a categorical aid concept that is not subject to the whims of, budgeting discussions, and they lock it in and it's legislated that way? I mean, that would certainly be a way to do it. Keep it in categorical, but not make it so negotiable.
Perhaps we should ask Eric to try and do just what you said, Val. We have a meeting with Eric on Monday.
Yeah.
From 9 o'clock to 11 o'clock, the advisory council is meeting, Zooming. So this is definitely going to be a topic of discussion, I'm sure, during that meeting. But maybe Eric could get some information and provide it back to you or to myself when we're Zooming on Monday.
Yeah, I'll send him an email and see if he can get that for us.
Okay. So a little bit more work on that. Note to some of these others, and let's give further consideration. It'd be great to have comments directed back to Bruce on all of these recommendations.
Yep.
I think the special education recommendations are have not been discussed by the work group yet, but I think that they raise some really important issues.
Jay, I guess I was one of those on the special education aid issue, but I just want to focus on what we were just talking about, how it relates to this one. Special education aid for high need, high cost placements are outside of the adequacy formula now. And this recommendation is that they stay outside there, but that they be identified as a part of the adequate education commitment. And we have this problem of the legislature funding at a lower level than what's needed to fully fund the state's commitment. That's really built into the statute, actually. There's this concept of prorating in the event that the appropriation is less than what the costs add up to for all those kids. But it's an easier program. You really can't do it any other way, I think, than to have it outside the formula, because it's incidence, the incidence of the cost and where it falls with regard to school districts is uneven and unpredictable. And it can be very high in one small school district one year and very low somewhere else and so forth. So it has to be outside, just needs to be a strong commitment to it. And that's where we opted to go, and just to underscore in the statute that this is part of the adequate education commitment. I think that's the core of what we have there. And there's more detail in there for special education more generally, and some important detail. And Jane might want to pick up on that. But on the point we were discussing, I think it has to be outside of the formula, but it is adequate education.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And hopefully we can find goal or principle statements that achieve these outcomes. Greater participation, greater recognition of subcategories within the overall categorical aid. Rick, yep.
Yeah,
See.
thanks, Jay. I think we're going to have a huge problem here with, and I agree, I think it needs this special education aid has to stay out there as a categorical aid for those that are the $200,000 children that Dick is speaking of. The problem we have here is that this money doesn't come the year of the student showing up at your school, and yet the cost is there. And now we're going to increase the average cost per pupil. So in order for us to get to 3.5 times that amount, a district's going to have to kick out a lot more money, which they don't have. And they're going to be digging down into where they had before, the operational budget, to find it. So we have a problem here in terms of the costs here. If the average cost is increasing, now I'm putting forward a bill where we're dropping it from the 3.5 down to 2.5. So the state would kick in earlier. It would, I was seeing the costs of education going up per pupil. So I was trying to help the locals, but I need some help in this.
I hear the issue that you're trying to raise, and Bruce, maybe at least let's acknowledge that if the cost of an average outcome is going to be set at $17,000, that the impact on special education funding may necessitate adjusting that state contribution match.
Why can't the contribution for CAT aid be made in the year of the expense? So the school districts get that money immediately.
Address the availability of the funds.
Yeah, that's a great question, Mary, and I heard Rick imply that in his question as well. And there are details about because of the federal funding and federal definitions that require truing up enrollment levels in special education at the end of the year. And so it pushes the costs and the funding of categorical aid out into a subsequent fiscal year. It's not that I mean, I think we don't have a model suggested to us in this commission of another state that's doing this.
Jay?
Yeah, David.
I might also argue that there's a student equity issue in the availability of those funds in the initial year, because and I have no evidence that suggests this, but and we haven't, I don't think we've looked into it, but obviously districts that are better resourced may be able to find those funds than districts that aren't so well resourced. So it really becomes a student equity issue, especially in the under-resourced school districts. So despite the federal truing up of enrollments, we may want to have some sort of grant package available in those initial years for, you know, for all districts or something, and then true that up the following year.
Yep, yep. It's a good idea.
Yeah, I agree. That's an important issue. I'm glad it was brought up.
So we are right at 3:30. Just as I'm watching the clock.
I would keep making progress, Jay.
Well, I think you know, if there are other topics here that folks want to discuss,
Yeah, just a reminder
they're
that,
all meaty topics.
again, next Monday is a work group day. So adequacy will have a chance to come back to this material and refine it. And then bring it back to the November 12th full commission meeting. So we can either continue today, but there will be a chance for the work group to continue to massage this language for all these categorical aid programs.
Bruce, one of the times for these work groups on Monday, seeing we have a possible conflict with two of us on the Career Technical Education Council.
Oh, the morning meeting.
We'll, you know, the exec committee will figure that out. I mean, typically we've been 10 o'clock fiscal policy, 1 o'clock engagement, and 3 o'clock adequacy.
Yeah.
What time's your meeting, Rick?
9 to 11.
9 to 11, yeah.
9 to 11. Does public engagement need a work group meeting on Monday?
Mel or Carrie?
I don't think, Carrie, what do you think? We have to confirm our principles. That's one of the things that we've got to do.
Or
Yeah.
do you want to take the morning slot?
Well, if that would help, I don't know what others people's have scheduled for that particular time, based upon the posted times.
Yeah. I'm good if you need to switch times.
I'm okay to switch times. I don't know about Susan or John or David.
Okay, let's look into that, because I think this mostly affects Rick and Val, and we need them in the adequacy and fiscal policy group. So
Yeah, and before we leave this topic, I just want to reiterate or ask that take a look at this, the recommendations that are embodied here. Take a stab at them if they are deficient, or if they misstate something, as you're troubled by a word of cost or funds or similar, comparable, or anyway, do take a look and make those recommendations, or at least call it to the attention of Bruce, so that we can get this to the work group for next Monday. And thank you all for your conversation, and my apologies that we put this together this morning, but I thank Bruce for going through this over the weekend and pulling it together. David?
great, thanks, Jay. All right, so I guess we're swinging into where we landed on Thursday with some of the fiscal policy principles. And I think there were a couple at the tail end that we didn't really put a whole lot of discussion on. There didn't seem to be much support on them, but I wanted to sort of talk about those in a little more detail too. So Jordan, do you have a sort of a cleaned up version of where we think we, yeah, thanks for making that a little wider on the screen. Can you make it a little wider? Thanks. So you want to drive us through this?
No problem. Okay, so we, in the fiscal policy work group last Thursday, discussed some of our agreed upon core principles that we wanted to embody and put forth as recommendations. And those were discussed at length. And this is our effort at cleaning up some of those. I sent folks and posted the document. The Word version also includes the older version, so you can see all the notes we took and how it was originally constructed. But we landed on these. And so the first here just says the opportunity for an adequate education is based on student needs and community characteristics, should be multiple, and can be best made equitable through differentiated state funding. And then add a sub-bullet under that accountability and performance measures should be created to assure the districts are performing up to standards set by the legislature and DOE.
So questions or thoughts on that now that we've had a chance to, I think we kicked it around pretty substantially last week, and we've had a few days to sort of let it soak. And I think the interpretation of this is that the funding would be based on the opportunity for an adequate is based on student needs and community characteristics. So that's the estimated cost model, right? And can be best made equitable through differentiated state funding. So that would, now we're talking about the funds, where the funds come from to address the estimated cost for each district. And differentiated state funding would mean that not every district would receive the same amount of state funds. Thoughts on that? Now that we've had some time to let it soak. Dick?
Yeah, I was just thinking about this. I guess the assumption is that this is a piece of a larger set of principles. So it's a little hard to look at this piece without having the other stuff there. But the predicate for the first bullet, the opportunity for an adequate education, is some statement about what an adequate education is. And that statement is the outcome-based definition that we discussed earlier today. And if that's there, then this makes sense, but we've got to have that outcome concept present somewhere. That's all I want to say.
Thanks, Dick. Yeah, I think there's two parts to this, and this is the first place where we're sort of connecting this the education cost model, the opportunity for an adequate. No, you're right. The opportunity for an adequate education, and state funding. This is the principle where those two things get connected. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not taking a position, because it's not a fiscal policy issue, on what the cost of an opportunity for an adequate education is.
Okay.
That,
yeah.
Whether that's 100% of the estimated cost model, or if it's something else.
Right. No, that's fine.
And it's also not taking a hard position on what that differentiated state funding would look like, other than saying that it's differentiated state funding, that
right.
Some districts would get more of it and some districts would get less of it.
At what point, Dave, are we going to make that link?
Well, we've made the link here, but you're talking about how much more and how much less?
No, I'm talking about the link to the ECM. You know, we're good at generalities here, but this doesn't really tell us.
Yeah, you know, I think we sort of just talked about that too, and that link hasn't been established in the link between the cost of inadequate education and the ECM hasn't been established yet.
So we'll get there.
Well, either we'll get there, or you know, proposals that are you know, modeled and drafted in the legislature will get there. And
I think we have to have that discussion. Not today. We're not ready for it. But I know we're running out of time. But next week we need to within this commission get down to the reality of the ECM's costs and how they relate to adequacy and to all the fiscal policy stuff that we're talking about here.
Jay, what do you suggest on that?
Well, the issue is that we have an average cost for our target outcomes, which is $17,000 on average per pupil. I think, Dick, that's what you're describing for us, is that we aren't using an input-based model. We're trying to establish a new basis for defining that adequacy. And it's going to be, as we were just talking before, achieving that average outcome is by district is going to be a result of spending from local, state, and federal resources. That actual distribution, I mean, this harkens back to like February, doesn't it? What that distribution is. And I don't know that that's in our grasp to define the expectation of a dollar amount from state funds.
Well, I thought we were asked to, I don't have the mandate right in front of me, but the charge, but to speak to the cost of adequate education.
Well, and I think we can put something together with that around.
We're going to have to talk about it.
Around the $17,000 average, and what that means in terms of to achieve average outcomes in every district around the state.
Mm-hmm.
Dave?
Yeah, Bill.
I think just as a matter of process, I think one of the things we may be experiencing is that the adequacy work group worked on a set of issues, and the fiscal policy work group worked on a set of issues. And what we know is that the system of education funding in any state is a very integrated thing. And if you push on one issue, it has impacts on maybe 3 or 4 other issues. And to try and come to a consensus or a balance that treats with issue is hard. And I think maybe where we're at is that we need to try and have a kind of term sheet that tries to put on all of the issues on the same page, and that term sheet would then be the basis, the kind of guidepost for writing a report. I think that the issue Dick is raising has has been with us from the beginning. What is the, Fred Bramonti is a commenter on the site. He's saying, does this just mean that we're not going to spend the same amount of state dollars per pupil in every town? I think it does mean that, but it's hard to know that unless you see all the issues working together. That's just a process comment. I think it is very hard to get these presentations before a meeting and comment in a way that's thorough on it without seeing, being worried that if you say yes to one bullet, you may be saying yes to some other 3 bullets without really having it discussed.
Right. And no, and Bill, that's a good observation. I think we're coming to that,
Okay.
that time where everybody is sort of reviewing these principles and we're refining on these principles and building them out. And I think that was sort of displayed earlier this afternoon when Iris said, well, what are you talking about in fiscal policy with respect to funding? So having a chance to take a look at that allows you to, I think you're right, better understand the effect on adequacy definition, adequacy principles, and as well. So I guess the question here is, and Bill, I agree with your interpretation of this. I think this is saying that the state will look at factors to determine what the state funding would be in different cities and towns, depending upon those characteristics, depending upon their characteristics, and
which would be different than the current cost-based model, which starts with, which
That's not true.
the same amount.
That's not true. The current model has weights.
No, it does. You're absolutely right, Iris.
It's a differentiated funding model too. It just starts in a different place.
You're absolutely right. And there have been changes over the years, Iris, since the commission you worked on, that have diminished the amount of funds, state funds, flowing through the differentiated weights. That's
it's constructed as a formula that's differentiated.
No, I agree.
Even when butchered.
Although it's not as substantial, it's less than 15%. So I think
that yes.
So I think, Dave, there's almost, in my mind, there can be no question that a poorer community based on its characteristics should receive greater state aid per pupil than a community that has more capacity. And I kind of see that, and that community should receive much less or no state budget aid per pupil. And I think I see this bullet as saying that.
Yeah. Anybody interpret it any different way? Or disagree with it?
I don't think it takes a stand on whether this is, I don't think it calls for targeting only.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't
what Bill would say. And I just don't agree that that's what it says. I think
no.
I agree with Dick in a lot of ways that, I don't see anything in these principles to object to, but I think they leave a lot of questions unanswered. And that's fine. If you want to leave all those other things for legislative deliberation, that's fine.
Well, we're not saying that, Iris, and these principles will help advise how the report is written, and then we can work on the additional language that comes out in the report. But we've got to have a starting point for building building the report.
Wasn't clear that's where you were going.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
I understand.
Yeah. So I mean, we're not dealing with whole cloth on this.
So some of what Dick was concerned that we should discuss may still be discussed.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And I think, yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Good.
So that's what I'm hearing, Iris. Yeah.
Good.
We'll get there, even though time is
Yeah.
Just passing us by quickly.
Yeah.
All right.
And the next point is with respect to the state property tax. And we had quite a bit of discussion on this. And I think the idea here is that the state property tax is collected locally. It's remitted to the state treasury, and the state of New Hampshire doesn't issue rebates, tax abatements, stuff like that, based on characteristics of a municipality and what their estimated cost of an adequate education is. That's my interpretation of this. It also, I think, extends to the next bullet by referencing it in a sub bullet here, that the importance of the property tax relief programs that are in need of improvement in being able to provide direct taxpayer equity as opposed to blanket taxpayer property tax relief, but direct taxpayer relief. And we've certainly heard from the administrator, the town manager in Newington. We've heard from the select board members in Waterville Valley. We've heard from people in Rye and Portsmouth about the people living in who live in their communities that live on a fixed income. And certainly we've got people here in Hopkinton and Concord and Bow and Claremont and Newport and Berlin and Wolfboro that also live on fixed incomes. So doing something, having a program in place that's properly funded and properly made actionable with up-to-date limitations or qualifications is really important. So it's important as part of the state property tax provision, but it's also important as a standalone provision. So that's why it's built out in a little more detail in the third point made here.
Dave?
Yeah.
I support the concepts in both of these bullets. The one thing I thought we did talk about is adding in that it was gonna not, the eligibility would be based on low and moderate income, but also, low net worth. In other words, you're not gonna have really high net worth individuals who may just have low income for the moment qualify for this.
Yeah, I think let's put that in. I think we did have net worth on maybe one of the other things, and I think it's something that we shouldn't lose, but a focus on, but it's something to consider when building out the program definition in a bill as well as in rules.
Yeah, thank
you. Yeah, Dick, did you?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
I didn't.
All right.
We don't have anything here on the minimum local contribution.
But I think it does. I'm sorry, Dick.
No, you.
No, at some point, I think we're going to need to be making some what's the term, educated guess on what or how much a program like this needs to be funded, or how much funds need to be used for a program like this based on maybe percentage of state property tax or something like that. We're going to need to come up with something. So
Dave, did you incorporate into this a cap where you can't, on going up towards the upper end, can it be capped?
yeah, I think that's that would be the way to look at it, that it's something that tapers, and then eventually you're no longer qualified.
Are you talking about the minimum contribution, Dave, when you said that?
No, I'm talking about the property tax relief program.
Oh, I see.
I was talking about the other end.
What's the other, what are you talking
I
about?
thought you weren't talking to
For
one another.
properties that have a high property values, is there a point where I don't want to stop business from moving into a community? So how do we deal with that?
For residential property with high valuation?
I wasn't talking about residential, I was talking more commercial.
I think this is low and moderate. I think this is residential. So those are the first 3 points here. And then what do we have below that, Jordan? I know you're typing there. Some sort of phase in. And then we also had a couple of other points that, like I said, we didn't have a lot of discussion on. I think people were sort of, tapped out at that point. But I'm sort of not thinking we need to take a position on things like local property tax growth limits, or local property tax raised over and above the ECM, to fund education above the ECM, and having some sort of percentage of that goes to the education trust fund, sort of like what they do, what's happening in Vermont. I don't think there was, it didn't sound like there was much interest in either of those 2 things at this time, but I think we might want to include a section in the report on local property tax breaks or education, equity costs over and above the ECM, just so that future legislatures can consider those.
On your top bullet there, going back and regressing, Dave.
No, we don't regress around here, Rick.
No, but you have standards set by the legislature and DOE. DOE does not set standards. It's the State Board of Education.
That's fine, yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
No, I like that. That's good. All right, do we have anything else to review on fiscal policy right now? Jordan?
I think those were the main points. I'd encourage folks, if and when they get the opportunity, to take a look back. Like I said, there were there was a lot of further conversation that the fiscal policy work group didn't come to consensus on, and so those weren't included. But I imagine there will be a bit more discussion of some of these topics at the next fiscal policy work group meeting.
Yeah, so that's a real important point, and so I mean, I think to what Iris was saying on the very first point, that it's not saying that other funding approaches couldn't be taken. It's just saying that one that uses differentiated funding could can provide student equity. So I think that's where we're at on this. Anybody else, anything on that? No, good. So I think we're shifting gears. We're right at 4 o'clock. Shifting gears to more of a full commission review on policies. We're probably beyond the adequacy and fiscal policy discussions right now, because I think we've been having those. But we did want to talk about the principal findings from engagement. But before we do that, do we want to take a a 5-minute or 3-minute or whatever people feel they need, 5-minute break? Yeah, is that a yes? Okay, so why don't we say it's 4 o'clock on the nose right now, so 4:05 we'll resume. We'll keep the Zoom running, and we'll jump in with Mel taking us through public findings of the engagement work group. Does that sound good, Mel? All right. So, Bruce.
Yes.
Yeah. When we were talking about the state funding in that first bullet, the differentiated state funding, there was a sub bullet with respect to accountability. Would that accountability apply to both the local dollars towards the ECM as well as the state dollars towards the ECM?
Great question. I'm not sure that there's a way to, yeah, it's good. That's a policy question.
Yeah.
Partly. Although I guess maybe there's some legal or constitutional question there about how you, at the state level, how you enforce accountability against local property tax dollars, how people choose to use them how community districts choose to use them at the local level. So I don't know the answer to the question, but it's a good question. It's for me, it's connected to this other question, as I noted on the agenda also, what are the sticking points that need priority attention? Accountability is, that needs to be fleshed out more, but I come back to Rick's question, how do we separate out what might be called non-adequacy costs? So state dollars aren't being used to pay for local discretionary programs that are not related to performance outcomes. Now, conceptually, you can connect everything to performance outcomes, right?
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about HVAC, we've talked about football, but I think there is an accountability conversation in front of us that includes what are the indicators of accountability besides attendance, graduation rates, and achievement test scores. And once I think there's an interest in the commission in expanding those indicators. To get back to the CTE conversation, an indicator of performance is going to be post-secondary career and college readiness. And so that's a part of expanded notions of accountability. But I'd be interested in people like Dick, Bill, other members of the commission around your question. Do we hold local districts accountable for how they spend local property tax dollars?
So I actually brought it up from the other side of that, the equation. Would you then hold districts accountable for the state grant if the state grant was based on community need, like property wealth? Yeah. so that low property value communities would be held to a higher degree of accountability than high property value communities. That doesn't sound fair.
Right. So yeah, I get the logic there, because if a community proportionately is using a higher rate of state dollars versus local dollars because of low property wealth, then you're going to have that problem you just identified.
Right. Right. And both communities may be putting in the same local tax effort. One's just getting more grant and one's getting more, out of their local tax effort.
Right. Yeah, we as I said, we need more conversation about accountability.
Yeah.
And we may leave some of that open for, as issues for the legislature to address that are outside of the UCM.
The legislature is all knowing and all wise, Bruce, so don't worry.
That reassures me.
The Wizard of Oz.
Would that it were so.
I don't know if Mel and Carrie are listening right now, but I don't know how much detail they're ready today to share in terms of their findings or their principal findings. My impression is that they had another round of conversation on that before bringing that to the full commission, but you can see what they say.
Well, if we don't have to go the full time, I'm sure people will find uses for this hour of their afternoon.
Certainly the time change is affecting it. You look outside, you go, wait.
Going to get dark.
Yeah.
I'm about ready to go to bed.
But it's been so windy here. It's been unbelievable.
It's really windy here, Dick. Down Main Street in Concord, it is just unbelievably gusty.
I've got a greenhouse, a hoop, self-made greenhouse,
Sure.
and fantastic production of crops from it. But it blew down this morning.
Oh, no.
Just in time for a good frost tonight.
Yeah, right, exactly. There goes the lettuce.
Yeah, I just pulled all my lettuce last week, but hey, eating fresh lettuce on October 30th was.
It's unbelievable. Yeah.
Okay, I think we're getting everybody back here. So, so we got a few items on the agenda for now, or for the remaining part of today's meeting. Principal findings from engagement efforts. I know there's more discussion that public engagement work group is going to be having on that. So we'll get as far as we can with that, and then I guess the rest of it sort of what do people feel are like the sticking points? I know there's been a lot of things that we haven't fleshed out, but you know, we'll be doing that in the report, and things that really need to have some priority discussion on while the report's being written, and we can make sure we hit those points on the next either work group or commission agendas. So anyway, I'll start with we'll start with public engagement principles, and I'll hand it over to Mel.
Well, as everybody knows, we've had a whole series of opportunities to talk with a variety of different people across the state. And what Carrie has done, she has pulled together what we call a crosswalk of the various comments that have been made throughout these engagement opportunities. And the work group last week basically went through that crosswalk and came up with, I think it was 5 basic principles that we have been hearing from people. Carrie, do you have those that we can report to the group at this point in time?
Yes. We also have some notes underneath them that was part of our conversation. So I sent a link to this Google Doc to the commission members if you want to read through it. I can also post this document online. So here it is. Mel, if you want to. Do you want me to you want me to talk through it?
Yeah, just walk through it, yeah.
Okay, so as Mel said, we had just a crosswalk of major themes from all the engagement activities, including public comments, and then also a document that links to all the summary documents. Those are all linked under, for those who are interested, they're all linked under the October 29th engagement work group materials. And so it goes to each different summary doc as well for each activity. What we focused on was what strategies do we use, Who do we hear from and what do we ask? So some of the major points here, we're still editing here, is the issue of inequity is across every single kind of public input single group. There is recognition that the current system does not provide an equitable opportunity for adequacy. There's also a need for local property tax relief. So that's number one in terms of equity. And then there's also a need for local property tax relief. This comes out of public comments and engagement activities as well. So it was an important part of the conversation in terms of policy. Focus on, as was talked about previously in the discussion, the other work group principles. There's concerns for people who are on fixed income, people who need local property tax relief is clear, concern about local costs for education as well. So trying to link what we heard in the engagement work groups with what's being discussed elsewhere in the commission. So the local cost of unfunded mandates are concerning in most engagement activities, and and just in terms of the state doesn't increase its share when it puts requirements in place. So there's a lot of mandates that local communities and districts are facing that are difficult to put in place. There's a question about disparity, both from this is kind of a repeat, but there's a question about disparity, both from a tax standpoint, poverty standpoint, and a racial standpoint. The student input made this clear, and others brought this up in terms of racial inequities in relation to English language learners and social class, socioeconomics. Our group wanted to learn more about this term and wants to learn more about this in terms of equitable funding. Thinking about student-centered comments around funding, the funding should be focused on student needs around the state. So thinking about what do people know about how money is allocated to districts? So people making decisions and people also paying for schools. People recognize the differences in resources across the state. Based on our conversations, people realize that. We're almost here. So there is a concern and conversation about how the pandemic has affected student needs and funding. There are short-term needs and long-term needs. Misunderstanding or want for understanding about how this fits in the school funding formula conversation. There's a concern about maintaining teacher quality, especially in relation to teacher and staff salaries, turnover and retention in terms of bolstering staff development over time. People also brought up leadership turnover. So the questions we had was, how does this relate to the differing costs of living in the state? What does it mean for addressing equity and student performance? And then the final major area we discovered from the findings was there needs to be a conversation about revenue and how people understand the funding. So an overlap of kind of public education about the funding itself. For instance, the current revenue satisfies the current needs, but that may change. This is a question for people. People are concerned. What might be new taxes on the table? Is there enough right now? The conversation in the commission, not how much, but how is it distributed? And linking back to the AAR models that were just discussed. We also talked about some unique perspectives and inputs that weren't necessarily rising to the top over and over, but were clearly important. So linkages to youth and educator perspectives, having enough staff, providing unique curricular opportunities that are important to them. For instance, we love our teachers and we want experiences in schools that go beyond the basics to prepare for the careers ahead of them for students. Accountability measures are not part of the current model. Adequacy of staff at the Department of Education. These are messy notes, so I'm going to move past that one. I think we need to discuss that a little more. I think this is just in terms of like how, if it's an outcomes-based model, what's the accountability of the measures? And just the overall conversation of the shift in education. thinking about workforce development in terms of equity in the creation of the workforce, whole student-centered approach to funding schools. So people talked a lot about social emotional learning, just meeting students' basic needs, competency-based education, and how looking to those, talked about the PACE program, which is competency, about student competencies. And then we had further questions and implications down the road that we also discussed. So kind of repeat what I just talked about. And then our final, because one of our recommendations will be further public outreach and education, because there are clearly differing understandings about how the funding works or the proposed models may work, or how it'll unfold in the implementation. We took some time to talk about who may be starting audiences for public education. And so that's this list here. I hope that was sufficient.
Yeah, Carrie, if you can go back up to the top where we started with the principles. Corinne or Susan, do you have any comments regarding the conversations we've had on these principles? I can't see the whole screen. So Corinne, do you have any comments on that? You're muted. You're muted, Corinne. There you go.
No, my comments really, we heard a lot with the adequacy conversation that really kind of hit home with everything. The students were very vocal, and I think in the process of all of the different types of groups, I think we really discovered that people really don't know the nuts and bolts of how funding is currently divvied out. And people really use what they know to make their judgments. So if they visit a different school, whether it's an athletic event or another reason to go to a different school, and it seems so much better, the facility is, bigger, and, they begin to form judgment based on what they have and what others have. That came out in some of the conversations throughout, I thought. I was glad to hear the conversation on CTE, because I think it's really important that CTE completers and college and career readiness, which are all driven in competency-based learning, really becomes the tenet for workforce development for the state of New Hampshire. And we did hear quite a bit of that throughout some of the groups. So, yeah, the property tax relief was another piece for me. I don't think that property tax release is just an application process if you're a low income family. I think it's local property tax relief for all the local property tax payers. But that's a discussion for fiscal policy, I imagine. So, I mean, those conversations came up in our threads as well. Because what you have to provide at, say, $39 per thousand versus a neighboring town that might have $16 per thousand is quite different. And if there's a tax relief program for either just the elderly or low income that have to put in an application, it really is not uniform or equitable to give everybody tax relief. But again, that's a fiscal policy conversation too. But these are some of the themes that did come out from people from different groups.
Yeah, I think we also, the issue of not understanding how the system works was very clear. And also I thought there was a general concern about equity. Yep. That there needs to be that regardless of where students live, there should be some greater equity in how they can gain access to an equal educational opportunity. And so I think based upon some of this, I think once we have the commission's conclusions, the outreach to the beginning of the list that was at the bottom of the page that Carrie had. How we do that, hopefully some of the commission members will be able to get into a kind of a little speakers bureau or whatever, and use some of the highlights that we are preparing that will basically demonstrate not only or illustrate not only some of the things we found here, but also will be embellished of the both adequacy and the fiscal policy principles that we come up with. So, David, any questions?
Well, I think you covered it really well. I mean, I did. I think you sort of mentioned it, and I think Corinne did too. But the sort of not just the weaving in of adequacy and fiscal policy principles, but also the sort of factual findings that the commission has had since January, and clearly there's what we're learning about the sort of the public understanding or general understanding of school funding doesn't necessarily align with factual findings, and we probably want to at least point out where the factual finding is if it's
Well, and we did look at the survey too. I mean, that was
Yeah.
another form of input, more of a formal process of gathering data rather than the anecdotal issues that we got through the various outreach programs that we had with various groups. But the survey was also an element that we did look at too.
Another word that came through at different times was hoping that the commission members would be bold and I don't want to say daring, but bold in the approach of totally creating a funding formula that is going to meet, adequacy for students and is equitable across the state. So wherever that tax rate is, whether it's a combination of state and local, or I think that's something that has to be decided as well. And what percentages does that look like? I think amongst some of the stakeholder groups, they really pointed out, don't get in the way of the political barring, so to speak, or don't let that get in the way, but move forward as a commission to do what is right for kids and the growth of the state. So that came across, and we talked about, well, what does it mean to be bold? And we said, yep, out of the box.
Well, also bold is in the eye of the beholder too. So it's.
I know.
Val.
Yeah, just a question on the concerns about equity. Was that a concern that was sort of universal, whether it was coming from people in a rich district or a poor district, or was it mainly the people in the poor districts asking about equity?
Well, I think it was universal. I think the idea that regardless of where kids are, there ought to be some equity here, and I don't think it was related to just poor districts or people from poorer districts saying that. I think there was just a general principle that we need to be able to provide equity for kids regardless of where they are.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see how well that stands up when, a statewide property tax or some other funding mechanisms, hits one group more than another to pay for one group. Is this just, something that's easy to say, or when it's your taxes going up by a couple $1,000 a year to pay for a kid in another district to get an equitable education, is that concern going to fall apart? Because Go ahead.
But this goes right to the point you've made several times, Val. And that is when you begin to look at how do we create a workforce in this state? And we can't just rely on workforce coming from a Bedford, for example.
Correct.
Kids in Derry or in Newport or in Claremont or in Berlin, they're part of this workforce that we're going to have. And we need to make sure that those students that are coming out of those, of all communities, have some equity as it relates to their future. And I think that goes back to my argument for some time that we need to look at our kids, not my kids.
Yep.
Now that's a big leap, I know, for people, but you cannot talk just about workforce development. Oh, but it's only my kids.
Right.
And I think that you've been a harbinger of that concept, of which I deeply believe in what you're saying. I think the commission believes in that. So I think when you get into the argument of where does this money go, where do we take the current expenditures that we have and how do we disperse it differently to provide that equity? That's the argument that we need to just press with people. It's not just who's in my town, but it's what's happening across the state. That's the argument. And you had mentioned, as long as I've got the floor here, you had
Go for
mentioned
it now.
you had mentioned, Val, at some point in time, what is the scenario? What is that vision? And I would implore you and Susan to look at that issue, because you both have that passion around that, to come up, what does this mean with what we're trying to do? How does that meet that scenario that you are passionate about? And if you could commit something to writing, that would be helpful for the commission to look at this, our kids more, and that workforce that we're trying to develop across the state, not in just sections of the state. Sorry,
No, that's a critical argument. I mean, we need to sort of convey the fact that adequacy is not just some sort of educational abstraction, but it has real world consequences. Adequate to what purpose?
Right, exactly.
Where is it going? What are we teaching? And what is the outcome for the state and the state's interests and the state's economy and our quality of life and everything else that ties into a stable economic output in the future. So,
and just on one more point on that, Iris, is that if we can develop those students that have that commitment to that workforce, they'll stay in the state.
Yep.
Right.
They won't leave. Sorry, Iris, go ahead. You're muted, Iris.
There you go.
Think about the old constitutional language that the purpose is to have an informed citizenry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah.
I did want to raise in those points that
which we hope for tomorrow.
Carrie, you were going to comment?
Yep. I did want to raise in the points that there also was conversation about just the yes, in terms of equity for students, but and students are included in families and community, people are paying taxes on their homes. There's also a concern about the rising costs of living as well. And so when we are, in terms of the findings from the engagement activities, reminding everybody that we've received a number of public comments. We also talked to residents who are 65 and older, students, taxpayer associations, and then the Educator survey, which was a variety of ages and also a lot of different communities. People didn't always live and work in the same communities. And the Granite State poll, which, I mean, this is like, this is a couple pages out of like lots of information, of course. Equity from the taxpayer side also, from a perspective of someone paying in the system was also of a concern. So, it's the balance of those two conversations, as you all know. But that was definitely, when you rise up a major area, that's where equity those are the two areas of equity, I think, for sure.
Yeah, just one last point, Dave, and then I'll be quiet. But when we had the student input one, that was a very telling conversation. I mean, the students were very, very supportive of the teachers that they had. I mean, the caring that the teachers and the students had together was very impressive. But what was hurtful was when they would say, why don't we have more teachers? And they would compare their school with Pinkerton, for example. And it says, if we had more teachers, we could have more classes. Pretty obvious. And so it was really a plea for them to look at from a funding standpoint. Obviously, they're like a lot of others, they don't understand the whole funding thing, but their plea to have more funding so that there could be more teachers in their school so they could have the same kind of classes that we're having in other schools that were more well off than they are. And and we need to listen to student voices. I mean, one of the things I think that I've come, obviously I'm aged in this situation, but I've come to have a much greater sensitivity to what young people are saying, because they've got a very short timeline with which to get their education to get into the workforce. And that short timeline, they should be impatient around that. And so as we listen to what their needs are, that's got to be part of our conversation. That's it from the engagement group, David.
Wow.
Thanks, Mel. Anybody, anything that they'd like to add to that? Mel, I think that's a great way to sort of cap off the engagement discussion for this afternoon. And certainly a lot more work as all these work group principles come together and morph together to become the commission's work. So couple of things we want to sort of shift into. Just quick conversations, not a whole bunch of stuff, but sticking points, things that we haven't talked about, things that might be missing, things that definitely need priority attention. And I'll start it off with a couple just because I talked with Bruce about one just as we went to break at the top of the hour. But with respect to accountability, if we're looking at both state dollars as well as local dollars funding the estimated cost model, does the state how does the state treat accountability for both the state dollars and the local dollars? It's just something to consider. I'm not looking to debate it right now, but we had that conversation when House Bill 709 that Rick and I had developed came through House Education, and we didn't feel that that having accountability for resource strapped communities when resource high resource communities didn't necessarily have accountability was fair. So I think it's a policy question.
Dave, two questions for me.
Yeah.
One is as we begin to deal with the issue of outcome-based student funding, how we trace the outcomes, how we trace how districts are doing, that's going to place a much greater demand upon the Department of Education, which is sorely understaffed at this point in time. So that's point one. Point two is that in one of our engagement groups with the municipality, one of the points that was made is that one of the persons said, well, we don't want to be average. We want to be above average. How does this relate to that? Because currently we are above average, and we don't want to lose that for our students. And I think that was an argument that was made that I think we need to spend at least some time talking about.
You're talking about on a district basis? What about a district goal that is above state average?
Yeah, right, yeah, yes.
Yep.
And
Good.
being able to maintain that as
Right,
as
yeah.
as a local.
Let's see. Yeah, I had also track outcomes, data collection from DOE, DRA, and DHHS. We all of our, as we're going through the report, we really need to be have a sharp focus on how we can be improving data collection to so that when this exercise is repeated 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, that there's more to work on, work from, I should say.
Because one of the issues for me anyway is that if you have a district that is low performing, that gets additional funds, what is the support mechanisms to make sure that they can improve? And, right now, I'm not speaking negatively about the department. It's just that they are just so resourced that if a school district says, okay, we're ready to go, but we need some additional assistance here, where's that assistance come from?
And then just as examples, I want to talk about a couple of more mundane points that I think need to get some attention in the final report. We haven't spent a lot of time talking about them, certainly not recently, but assessment standards has come up a couple of times, and there's certainly a data collection element to that as well, and connections with policy development. Whether we're looking at homestead exemptions, things like that. What type of data do we have as far as owner occupied dwellings or primary residence and things like that that may factor into to those sorts of policies. And another one that I think came up way at the beginning, but we haven't had any since we sort of swung into outcomes, haven't had any discussion of it, is the New Hampshire retirement system. And obviously the support from the state to school districts went from 35 to 25 to 0 back in 2010, 2011, 2012, something like that. And there have been initiatives to bring that back to say 10% or 15%. I think there was an initiative to do that in the last budget. I don't think it cleared the final. Bill, do you remember if it cleared the final budget? I don't think it did.
Did not.
Yeah. But should something like that get put in, how does that factor into the estimated cost model? Because now there's an additional grant that takes into consideration costs that are already in the estimated cost model. So we need to be vigilant on other legislative initiatives that might fund certain aspects of K-12 education outside of the ECM. Does that sound fair?
Yeah.
Jay? Yeah, and Bill? Yeah.
I think it does, and a related point is the point that I've heard talked about a couple times is recognizing that we live in a real changing budget environment where we're facing challenges of COVID, and these recommendations will go into the legislative process and be considered. I think one thing I'd like to have the commission consider in the report is a recommendation that, for example, with the retirement fund, if that were to go forward, it's important that the equity goals of the ECM model, which I think, Dave, you're kind of referring to, which identify relative need of communities, also be reflected in the way that state aid and support starts to get rolled out. I mean, it's not going to all go in place in one fell swoop. And we've talked about phasing in, but as it phases in, I hope that we consider that the first dollar of phase in is directed to improve the regressive distribution, whether it be in an adequacy formula, special education formula, or reigniting a sharing formula with the retirement system. The first dollar should focus on trying to address our most needy communities first, because it's going to take a while, you know, obviously, to get everything in place given our budget situation.
Great, great. No, thanks for putting some additional clarification on again, complexity, things that are going to make these things more complicated, to things that need to be considered with other budget related initiatives. So, and keeping equity up front on that. What are some other ones? Either sticking point, things that we may have forgotten, things that are priorities that haven't been talked about. So if any come up, and I'm sure they will, and I'm looking for Rick right now because I know Rick likes to let things soak a little bit, which I do too. So, you know, I might come up with something at later on tonight or 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. Maybe not, probably not. But if I do, and if you do, email it to Bruce, and we can collect these things. We can make sure that at least they're captured in the report. We'll probably, you know, enlist you to build some words around them, and that way we don't lose stuff. I think it's important that we have a comprehensive report that captures our full conversations and considerations. So, anything else on this, Bruce?
No, this is good. Our final report outline or table of contents now I think does reflect most, if not all, of the issues that just came up, the sticking point issues. I think what we'll have to decide as a commission is which ones, how specific our language will be around around these sticking points, and how much will provide us guidance that require attention in the next legislative session. And I do think that our schedule is set up now for us to have time in our work groups to address these over the next 2 weeks. Really, it's going to be, as I said before, next full commission meeting is Thursday the 12th. And then I noticed, I just checked our schedule, we have another full commission meeting on Monday, November 19th. That is the extended session from 1 to 4:30. So that's when we're going to pretty much have a full working draft of some kind in front of us. There'll still be some holes in it, but we need to get there so that over the next, between November 19th and November 30th, our final scheduled meeting, we have your input and we have a chance to modify that draft based on that input.
Bruce, I think the one thing that would be nice, and this is easy to say and harder to do, is to try and have that draft ready a few days before the meeting, so that, because I think we ground a little bit today with documents that came just before the start of the meeting, and it's hard to get on top of those. It is for me. So, you know, with the report, obviously that's a more complicated document.
No, that's a goal. Thanks, Bill.
Along those lines, I think I've lost track of this, but is the outline for the report on the website or somewhere?
I don't think it is, Jordan. It's such a work in progress. We're tweaking it all the time.
If you could send some form of it to us, that would help.
That it's addressed in a commission meeting and it becomes part of the minutes of the meeting.
Yeah, and we looked at a draft of it a couple of weeks ago, I think, and that was distributed and posted on the website, but changes that have been made subsequently, I'm not sure if that's been sent out yet, so we can do that.
We'll update it. Yep.
Okay, that'd be great. Thank you.
Great. Well, I think we're right around quarter of five, and on track to unless anybody else has anything they want to add right now. We'll hear from members of the community. Let us know what's on their mind, and because that's important stuff for us, and all gets captured and posted on the commission website. If you don't want to do it live, you can certainly do it as an email to schoolfunding.commission@unh.edu. That'll get to us as well. And so we're ready to go to that. Jordan, you want to take care of the administration of this? And I see a hand up.
Great. I'll bring in Jeff.
Great. Welcome, Jeff.
Good afternoon. My name is Jeff McClinch. I'm with the New Hampshire School Funding Fairness Project. I want to thank everyone for their time and giving me the chance to contribute to your conversation again. I really wanted to just offer some brief thoughts about 2 points that were raised during today's meeting. The first was the possibility that the commission might leave some key decisions to the legislature. And in that context, I really just wanted to recall for members that the legislation that created the commission stipulates some very specific and very substantive responsibilities that need to be fulfilled. And, just a quote from that legislation, it stipulates that the commission shall review the education funding formula and make recommendations to ensure a uniform and equitable design for financing the cost of an adequate education for all public school students in pre-kindergarten through grade 12 in the state. It also stipulates that the commission shall reestablish the baseline for those costs, programs, staffing, and facilities needed to provide the opportunity for an adequate education. There's certainly more there, and I don't want to belabor the point, but I think it does basically, from my perspective and the organization's perspective, lay out some very specific responsibilities that will need to be fulfilled and cannot be left to the legislature. The second point I want to raise or respond to is that there's some discussion today about what the word bold might mean. As we at the project helped to coordinate a petition that used that word, I thought I'd offer our perspective on that. In more specificity, that petition included a bullet that, and I'll just quote it here, urge the commission to be bold and visionary, undeterred by political considerations or by immediate and fiscal economic conditions. So I guess I would offer that to me and to I think the people who sign this, bold means that the commission should act without consideration of the immediate politics or the immediate fiscal or economic conditions. In the latter case, those are certainly daunting and serious, but with any hope, they will be temporary, albeit hopefully not too much longer. And really the commission's work is meant to be for generations now in school and for taxpayers now paying property taxes, but for generations to come. And so I think that boldness is very much imbued with the sense that Representative Myler shared of justifiable impatience, that people want the commission to act and they want them to act in a very substantive way in trying to reach a conclusion. So I want to thank you again for the time, and forgive me for running on at length here.
Not at all, Jeff. Thanks for sharing your comments on that. Appreciate your attention here and your commitment to this project and hopefully the product as well. So thanks. So let's see, we take people and raise your hand on Zoom, or I don't see any call-ins, but *9 on the phone will also do it. Or if people want to get back to visibility on street corners and holding signs and getting cars to honk at you, that's it's getting dark out there, but
it's still windy.
Yeah, those big totems might be quite a job to hold right now. So All right, well, I'm not seeing any other comments in the wings right now. When's our next comment period, Bruce? Nope, you're
November 18.
okay. Great.
And that'll be the last scheduled one because we're going to be wrapping up.
Yeah, yeah. So great. Anybody else? Anything for the good of the cause? No? Well, I hope everybody has a relaxing, inspiring, casual, easygoing, stress-free, low hypertension next few days. So, and we'll check in soon. Thanks. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.